America is losing her liberty. I don't think that's a question to anyone in this room. The question, deeper question, might be why? In my book, I talk about the last 2 decades of the last century where I believe we were moving toward capitalism. We didn't fully embrace it, but the Reagan-Thatcher years and what followed, including the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the end of socialism, sure looked like capitalism was winning. So what's been going on for the last 20 years? In effect, where have all the capitalists gone? And by capitalists, I mean advocates of capitalism. You know, years ago, if you said I'm a socialist, you know, you're an advocate of socialism. But if you said I'm a capitalist, most people would think you work on Wall Street or you're a venture capitalist. So why didn't we have a term as well that speaks to the issue of an advocate of capitalism? A lot of people shy away from the word, a lot of people shy away from the defense, including people in the liberty movement. So I want to address that to some extent today. Now, this is a plug for my latest book, Where Have All the Capitalists Gone? And we'll have some copies at the booth for you to look at. So some of the material I have is taken from that. Now this is kind of disturbing. Last summer, a poll of young Republicans, their support for capitalism has waned. Well, if we get that side not even advocating capitalism, something's wrong. So this is a poll from, I forget the group, you can look it up. It said, FEE, all Americans, young Republicans, 18 to 34, their positive or negative view of capitalism, and notice the negative view for young Republicans has doubled the negative view. And young Americans generally have pretty much an even split on capitalism. Now, you know the alternatives to capitalism. These students should. They do know. Socialism, fascism, theocracies. Why would those be preferred? AOC is a big folk hero, right? An avowed socialist. Democratic socialist, she says, so that'll whitewash the evil. Presumably. Now, what is capitalism? If I'm going to say it has moral defense, can we at least decide on what it is? Here are all the usual smears over the years. The first one's Marxist. The system of exploitation. The system whereby the powerful, the rich and powerful, get that way by extracting power and riches from the less able, from manual labor. So the whole Marxist argument about capital exploiting labor, but the cultural Marxism you see today is what? Men are exploiting women, white are exploiting blacks, so on. So there's a whole litany, straight, gay, there's a whole litany of alleged antagonisms, class and ethnic and racial and gender antagonisms. What about social Darwinism? We're often accused on the right, if you want to call us that, of being advocates of social Darwinism, dog eat dog, law of the jungle, cutthroat competition. Is that capitalism? No. It's unjust. They'll say it's productive. They'll admit it's productive. It issues a cornucopia of wealth. Unfortunately, it's unequally distributed, and that makes it unjust. Well, that goes straight to the heart of what I'm talking about today, about whether it's a moral system or not. Materialism. The caricature of capitalism is only concerned with wealth and wealth creation and hedonism and pleasures and gadgets and things like that. Now, capitalism is not a ghostly system. It is an earthly, secular system. But the idea that that's all it is a caricature and easily dismissed. Hedonism, that's a part of it. Cronyism, of course, you can't say capitalism these days without saying crony capitalism. So cronyism, meaning government and treatment for certain groups relative to other groups, is that the essence of capitalism? Is capitalism of, by, and for only capitalists? Meaning bankers, say, or Wall Streeters? It's a little academic here, but let me just put this matrix up because it's very helpful to my Duke students when I try to characterize systems of political economy. Now, this is not disputed even among critics of capitalism. They will look at this and they'll say, yeah, we agree with that. Why? Because they'll say the issue is whether the means of production are publicly owned and or publicly controlled. So the ownership and control of things. Now think of your own body. Do you own yourself? Well, if you couldn't control what your body did, if people mandatorily injected things in your body or told you you couldn't take certain things out of your body, you wouldn't have full control of your body. You would effect have self-ownership, but it would be muted by this inability to fully control. So control is a big part of owning things. Now here I'm focused on the means of production, but you could include personal goods in your own body. Capitalism is the system of private ownership and private control of these important assets. The opposite, socialism, is public control and ownership. That's it by definition. And by public, of course, anything beyond a mere commune is going to be the state. The state, the repository of physical force, legal monopoly on physical force. Now, fascism is a hybrid. Feudalism is a hybrid. I won't focus on feudalism, that was many centuries ago, but we're definitely moving toward fascism. We are not moving toward socialism. AOC, Bernie Sanders, Liz Warren, and others, if you look closely, they are not talking about nationalizing or government owning businesses or industries, are they? They're talking about government heavily mandating and controlling and regulating what private property does. And that's why it's trickling down, by the way, into your own personal space. It's a ubiquitous philosophy that says we get to tell you what to do, and if you don't do it, we jail you, fine you, maybe even kill you. So it's a highly charged word, I know, fascism, but it is private control. In other words, in principle, on paper, you still privately own, but it's public control. That is the system we're working toward, and we need to move toward capitalism. By the way, this is one of the reasons capitalism and fascism are often thrown together. Because the socialists will say, well, private property still reigns under fascism. So see, they're bothered that there's not complete public ownership and control under fascism. That's their only criticism. Now, I say in my book, this might sound a little odd, that capitalism is much more and much better than just an economic system. Now that'll sound odd because most people think its best feature is its economic prowess, its economic productivity. And it does have that in spades. But that's not why capitalism is losing. Capitalism is not losing because people think it doesn't deliver prosperity. It's losing because they don't think it's delivering prosperity fairly, or they think it's still exploiting, including now exploiting the planet. It has a great politics, constitutionally limited government, protecting individual rights. It has a great psychology, I should say. People of high self-esteem and self-confidence do better under capitalism and are urged to be so under capitalism, the best you can be. The epistemology of capitalism, the fact that it's rife with rationality and calculations and prices and interest rates and markets. You can't be irrational and succeed in business. You certainly can't in capitalism broadly. But I want to focus here on the morality of capitalism, because there are people on the right in the last few years who have recognized that a moral case for capitalism has to be delivered. But they differ on what that morality is. Now, I'm endorsing, I have for many years, the morality of rational egoism. And this isn't, in my view, just one of many flavors of possible moralities underlying capitalism. This will sound stark to you, but it's the only one. This is the only one that makes any sense, and it's the only one that works. I'll mention some others, other candidates, but first of all on capitalism, and then I'll go to the ethic of it. Notice Ayn Rand argues in Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. Now this is decades ago, this is 1966. Capitalism is a social system, notice, not just economic. A social system based on recognition of individual rights, including property rights, in which all property is privately owned, the recognition of physical force from human relationships. Basically, rights can be violated only by means of force, and in a capitalist society, no man or group may initiate the use of physical force against others. Now, what flows from this? The only proper functions of government. If the proper purpose of government is to protect individual rights, by the way, this will include economic rights, what we call civil liberties across the board, social rights, what some people call social rights, then the proper function of government would be to carry out this purpose. So there are only three, really, proper functions. Now compare this to what we have today. The only proper functions are police, courts, and a military. And not a military that is playing policeman of the world and defending other countries, but a true national defense, not a national offense, not nation building. Quote, the only function of government in such a society is the task of protecting men's rights, the task of protecting them from physical force. Now notice here there's a right involved, a right of self-defense. She says the government acts as the agent of men's right of self-defense. We're delegating this authority. This is why anarchism is not a possibility here. We're delegating this to an agency and then holding it accountable. This agency may only use force in retaliation against those who initiate force. Thus, the government's the means of placing the retaliatory use of force under objective control. So objectivity is crucial, the objectivity of the law, which we're losing, right? The rule of law is being replaced with the rule of lawlessness, with two-tier justice systems, depending on what political party you're from or what class you're in. Why is selfishness a virtue according to Ayn Rand? Selfishness strikes everyone as somewhat harsh, but notice underneath she says, called it the new concept of egoism. Now, Ayn Rand was not the first to advocate egoism in the history of economic thought, history of thought generally, but she stressed the rational, enlightened, call it what you will, self-interest rightly understood, some of the founders used to refer to it as. And we know that Adam Smith was the founder, of course, of political economy, the first to stress the importance of self-interest as motivating business behavior, but Ayn Rand's talking about it motivating all behavior and being proper. The moral justification of capitalism, notice this, she says, does not lie in the altruist claim that it represents the best way to achieve the common good, or sometimes you hear the public interest or the general welfare. She says it's true that capitalism does do this, if the catchphrase has any meaning, but it's merely a secondary consequence. And here's the key passage. The moral justification of capitalism lies in the fact that it's the only system consonant with man's rational nature. The only system consistent with, protective of man's rational nature. Now that anchors it in the facts of reality. We have a human nature. It's not malleable. It's true of all people at all times and all places. If you can get a scientific ethic that reflects human nature, now you can start to think about a system that is truly for the well-being of that entity, human nature. By the way, just as an aside, don't shy away from the word capitalism. It was coined by a socialist in 1850, not Marx, by the way, Louis Blanc, a French socialist. It's always the French. The root of capitalism is cap, caput, Latin, head. So if you have a cap on your head, it's a cap. The capital of a country is the head of government. Captain of a ship is the head. Cap is head. And Ayn Rand is talking about the essential nature of human beings, which is the rational faculty. I said that, right? What distinguishes us from other animals is we have the rational conceptual faculty. So even though it began as a slur, the system of capital and capitalist, I think we should embrace the name. I have a whole chapter in the book called The Mind-Based Etymology of Capitalism. So it is the system that best protects the freedom and best arrests the ward of those who use their mind in every field, not just in economics. So my theme in the book is that capitalism is not being assaulted because people are stupid about economics. Some people are stupid about economics, but some people want to be stupid about economics because they kind of know that if you study economics, you're going to come out for capitalism. Unless you really don't want prosperity, and now you have to start explaining yourself as someone who is inhumane, right? Who is not actually interested in human well-being. But what's that all about? Misanthropy? Look it up. It means hatred for humans. I think we do see that in some of the environmentalist movement. It's not even because they oppose prosperity, but it's because they believe it's amoral, lacks all morals, or is immoral, is positively evil. Excuse me, I went the wrong way. Now why? Here are some considerations. Basically, why is it judged as immoral? There are various codes of morality, if you know from school, if you've studied any of this. And I'm not going to go through each of these. I'm going to focus on the last one, but these are the alternatives, and some of them still exist in some form today. There are ancient principles of virtues in academia today. It's called virtue ethics. But there's also medieval and religious codes of morality having to do with serving God and serving neighbor. Kant and Fichte had a view that you should just do your duty regardless of the consequences. And if the consequences to you are negative, so what? Do it anyway, do your duty. That philosophy particularly fed into the Nazi attitude in the 1930s. Now, altruism, to some people, means kindliness and benevolence and generosity toward others. But actually, the person who coined the phrase, coined the word and talked about it, Auguste Comte, C-O-M-T-E, 1850s, he specifically coined the word to mean otherism. That's what ultra means. Ultra means other. So it's a philosophy or ethic of otherism, and he was trying to counter egoism. He was a counter-Enlightenment figure. He didn't want a religious ethic, but he wanted an ethic that amounted to saying, you only do moral acts if you serve others, not yourself. And the true test of this, of course, would be, not if you served others you value, like friends and family, that would be too selfish. So you have to serve what? Utter strangers, or even better, your enemies. You turn the other cheek when your enemy strikes you. Notice the test here. The test is, if it's not you, it's good. If it has anything to do with you or advancing your values, it's bad. That is actually the true meaning of altruism, and it's absolutely incompatible with human well-being and goodwill toward one another, because it's this system that says someone has to be sacrificed. You have to either sacrifice yourself to others or have others sacrifice themselves to you. So it kind of treats human beings as cattle, as animals. Human sacrifice, Ayn Rand said, should be rejected across the board. Now, egoism is the idea that you are the primary beneficiary of your own values. That's it. Look it up. You are the primary beneficiary of your own values. But it's not automatic. People are not automatically going to pursue their self-interest. They have to learn what it is, how to get it, and they have to be rational about it. So, just to reflect back to our basic principles here, egoism is best reflected in terms of the founding of America in the idea of the pursuit of happiness. Now, that's in the Declaration, it's not in the Constitution. But that very idea, believe it or not, is thought in the history of ethics. The idea that you should pursue your happiness, that happiness is a proper and necessary moral purpose of your life. And you often hear it said that if you're pursuing your happiness, it's either hedonistic, which is a caricature, or it's too individualistic. Why are you caring solely about yourself? Why aren't you caring about the happiness of others? Why aren't you serving others even if it makes you unhappy? Now, those of you in economics should know, what is the obvious moral manifestation of this ethic in commerce? The profit motive. The seeking of gain. The trying to generate revenues in excess of the cost of producing things. That's what profit is. Marx had said it's a theft. It's not. It's the net creation of value, but the key moral point here is you're creating value for yourself, of course also for customers. There's a trading principle here. But the profit motive, one of the reasons it's detested, one of the reasons it's questioned, is precisely because it's a manifestation of an ethic that's questioned, of an ethic that is disdained, rational egoism. Now think of all these principles if you know about the self-help movement and the self-esteem movement. If I described a person to you who had some self-esteem and self-respect, they were self-reliant, they were self-aware, they had self-confidence, they were self-made, they were self-sustaining. A lot of selves in there, but they're all healthy. Most people would say these are healthy things, but they all refer to the self and taking care of the self. So that's a paradox to some degree. Now, if I said to you, fish out of water, immediately to mind comes what? Out of their proper habitat. The fish out of water is not going to survive, right? That is human beings outside of capitalism. Capitalism is the optimal moral habitat for humanity. I have a quote here from my book that has capitalism not proved itself as the supreme social system, being the system of reason, which most encourages and rewards the reasonable and creative among us, has it not proved also to be the best habitat for humanity? Can a truly humane person possibly oppose capitalism? Further down, the real fault lies, however, with the capitalists' attempt to defend capitalism on the wrong grounds. These people seem to be hiding or cowering before incivility for no reasonable reason. And that makes them quasi-capitalists, not full capitalists. The unreasonable cause of this default is an unwillingness to defend capitalism's morality. or worse, a refusal to admit proudly that it's the morality of rational egoism. This is resisted by many people, especially if they're religious, you know. And the true capitalists, I think the genuine capitalists won't make this mistake. Now, I won't go through this in great detail. And by the way, if anyone wants these slides, just write to the Atlas Society. We'd be glad to send them to you. I won't go through these in great detail, but you should know what the pillars of capitalism are versus statism. And statism, I'm using the word broadly here to encompass any political system that subjugates the individual to the state. So it includes socialism, communism, fascism. Now, I go here from the bottom. If you look, it's very philosophical. The case for reason, the case for objectivity, absolutely central to defending capitalism. If you cannot defend man's rational faculty, reason, and its competency, and its necessity, you will never get to capitalism. And notice objectivity is under assault today. No one can be objective, it said. Everyone is subjective. Everyone is in their own little bubble. Everyone thinks in their own little group. So the assault on objectivity is a root cause of the anti-capitalist mentality. I've already talked about egoism and self-interest. The alternative to that is altruism and self-sacrifice. What gives rise out of egoism? Individualism. The reason individualism is under assault today is because of the collectivist ethic, that the group is more important than the individual, that the individual should serve the group. And it could be any kind of group, right? It could be your gender, your ethnicity, your nation, even nationalism is a form of collectivism. So the assault on individualism, you'll sometimes see it in schools that individualism is very racist, very patriarchal, individualism itself. Private ownership and control I've already discussed. The opposite is public ownership and control. Now the issue of rights, very confusing to people today. There are rights to life, liberty, property, the pursuit of happiness. That's it. There's no right to health or food or these other things. Because those other things are provided by people, you have no right to violate the rights of other people. You should be free under capitalism to pay for those things, but you know we're moving toward a diluted, inflationary form of rights in recent decades, and sometimes classified as duties. You are duty bound. You don't have any rights, you're just duty bound to serve the state or to serve others. So the inflation of rights to rights that aren't really rights is another way to undermine genuine rights. Finally, constitutionalism. The case for capitalism, I think, has to rest on a case for government, but government of a particular kind, one that's constitutionally limited to protecting individual rights. And the alternative to this, of course, is authoritarianism in various forms, an unconstitutional government. So the assault you're seeing on constitutionalism today in America, by the way, coming from the zealots of democracy. Democracy is considered the deity, where they get rid of constitutional checks and balances, they get rid of the electoral college, they want to pack the Supreme Court. All the methods of undermining and diluting constitutional limits on government are relevant here as well. There are tributaries, I talked about this last year, there are three possible paths to capitalism, and there are, I'll leave this for the question period if you want to ask, there are real defects in the conservatism argument for capitalism, as well as in the libertarian one. I'm advocating the objectivist path to capitalism as the only legitimate one. The others can help, but the other ones really need to learn what the best arguments are. Just quickly, in my class at Duke, I have a seminar called Capitalism For and Against, but notice the questions I asked the students up top. What do these various groups refer to as capitalism? What is capitalism? And we study 8 different groups here, 3 of which are purportedly for capitalism. What is it? Is it practical? Is it moral? And is it sustainable? I find that only objectivism answers yes on all 3. It's practical, moral, and sustainable. All the others, even the ones that are purported friends, wobble on these questions. I've critiqued some of the fans of capitalism that aren't doing so well, conservatives and libertarians. That's in the book. Let me finish by saying capitalism isn't perishing by the arguments of its rather feckless foes. The foes are really quite ridiculous sometimes. It's a lack of moral certitude on our part. It's a lack of seeing capitalism as a moral system, but then even if you get there, unwillingness to see it as the rational egoistic system. And that makes people feel guilty. It also makes them feel defensive. You're never going to win a football game by only fielding a defensive team. You have to have an offense. And you can't be spending all your commentary talking about how great the other team is winning and in chagrin. You see that a lot on the right. Look the next time you see commentary. How much of it is them just describing how the other team is kicking their ass? Here's my summary. Capitalism is the only legitimate habitat for humanity. It's sustainable because it's practical. And it's practical because it's moral. And it's moral because it's egoistic. And it's egoistic because rational, and rational because natural. It's natural for human beings to be rational. No argument for capitalism lacking these elements can win the day. That's all I have. I'll take questions and comments.